Paragon Space Development Corporation, which was involved with Elon's original, or was working with Elon on the Mars plant, they're going to send something to the moon eventually as part of the, I think, the Google Lunar X Prize. So that idea is in the works. We'll see if it pans out. In terms of settlements and things like that, have there been any studies done of infrastructure, what you need to sustain any sort of large settlement off Earth? And I think this is a key point because we tend to take the infrastructure for granted because it's always been here and it's been developed over a century or so. And if you're going to a really remote area and you have to build up that infrastructure and you're trying to attract people that have to live underground because of the radiation, which is not I don't think that's a natural state for most people. What do you need to sustain that? And infrastructure is just very costly. It's costly to build, maintain, repair, and expand. So if you guys can think about that.
Just a quick comment on that, because this is interesting. We've been talking a little about this in some of the board meetings of the foundation here, because we're in this sort of new space revolution situation where we are now, and where things, when we get to talking this comfortably, it's time to, we got to start mixing things up to the next level. It's interesting. By the way, a real quick side note. NewSpace is the engine, it's not the destination. Let's not ever confuse the two. The destination for our side of things is settlement. And what's interesting is your question is really good, because on the non-governmental side, settlement-oriented type studies haven't really been done since the 70s that I've seen. Real, serious types of studies. And a few of us have talked about that at this meeting. And they were generating artwork and things like that, like the space colonies and things like that. That was 70s stuff. It's time to begin revisiting those kinds of concepts, along with the exploration side and the research side, and looking at permanent research outposts and things like that. But from the settlement side, where you have community with commercial practices and families and kids going to school and this and that and the other, that type of thing hasn't really been looked at that much that I know of in the United States since about the 70s. And I think, and I'll wrap up my statement on this with this, is that would be very useful right now, because that helps contextualize what the NewSpace people are doing, so that it's not just about rich boys and their toys anymore. There's a bigger vision, and we can start pointing to where it's leading, which is cities on the moon, Mars, and the worlds and the space in between. And here's how you do it, and here's how you build, and here's how you get your mail, and here's how you do this, and here's what you do there, and la 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 la, and how it all works together. And I think that goes back to the excitement we had in the 70s, when we thought the shuttle was going to fly 50 times a year, and it was all possible, and there were going to be colonies in space by 95. I think we're back there again. I said this before in the conference. I think we're back in that period again. And I think it's a great question, and something we really need to look at. Chris, go ahead.
I know within NASA there's no studies of settlement. There are a few studies of long-term bases, but that's it. But again, as I was saying, that's what I think we ought to be studying. And in terms of the infrastructure to support it, I'd like us to be customers rather than developers of that infrastructure.
There's another element to the question about settlements or permanence. In my view, settlement is pointless unless it leads to permanence. But that's settlement and permanence as enablers. And I think it addresses the false dichotomy, the false argument between robotic exploration and manned exploration. And one of the ways I like to put it is, scientists out there with their instruments can do so much more than instruments out there without their scientists. So if you have a place for permanent location of scientists, you can do all the exploration that you want to do, you can do all the settlement that you want to do, you can do all the development that you want to do, and all of that is part of, Rick, what you were talking about, the full panoply of human activity, economic and otherwise.
We just have to decide. Again, I got to go back to the decision, because everything else is driven by that. We have to decide, just as Chris was talking about, that the Antarctic Directorate there are decisions, and everything trickles down from that, and then there's a decision culturally above that we want permanence in our science, and that we want settlement in our culture, and the two go together, and they can be leveraged off of each other, but that decision hasn't been made at the top level. We're kind of working from the bottom up or the middle sideways on this stuff. And, because again, it dictates the structures of the entity. Like he was talking about the National Science Foundation stuff. It dictates everything that trickles down from there. If we have a national law that says human settlement is the law of the land on the one side, and in the science community that we want permanent outposts on the moon and Mars, and somebody may be attached to an NEO, and you put those two together, I think amazing things could happen.